Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about how you can use infrastructure as code across multiple environments, as well as touching on intra-security around guest accounts. I'm your host Connor, and I'm joined today by Adam. Hi Adam.
Hey guys.
And we're going to be jumping in with Adam's topic first of all. So infrastructure as code for multiple environments. So what are we talking about today, Adam?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a question that came from a client I'm working with at the minute on a project, just around how do we use Bicep, ARM, Terraform, just infrastructure as code? How can we use that to deploy multiple environments and make that reproducible? So if you've got like a development, a test, and a production environment for your app, how do you make that code reproducible and ensure that you can deploy the infrastructure you need for those three environments with the least amount of maintenance, the least amount of files? So starting off, really, I think the most important thing is getting your infrastructure as code right. So whether you're using Bicep or Terraform, or if you're still using ARM templates, making sure that you author it in a way that's modular, and you have files that you can reuse, and break it down into smaller sections so it's more manageable. So say you're deploying a virtual machine, you've got a VNet within that, you've got an NSG associated with some subnets. It's important to break that down and have a template for your virtual machine, a template for your VNet, and a template for your NSG potentially, just to make it more manageable. And then those templates are reusable across different environments, across different projects. Even if you're collaborating with different companies, even and they're sort of creating some infrastructure as code for you, they can then reuse those modules that you've created. So it just makes it a lot more reproducible, and it's giving a solid foundation so that you can reuse those across environments and make sure that you don't have to maintain massive Bicep files or Terraform files that are hundreds and hundreds of lines long. You can really have short, simple files that are a lot easier for people to understand. And then, yeah, they're a lot more reusable. And the next thing that's quite important with that is making sure that they're all parameterized correctly as well. So you're using parameters to assign names, address spaces, SKUs for resources, everything that you should parameterize, because that also makes it a lot easier when you come to deploy to your multiple environments. So at that point, you can pass in prefixes or suffixes or environment codes and things like that, and you can build up your names within the script so that you don't have to create a load of names and hard code it in there. And what that does is it helps you to reuse those files across your environments. So you can have one set of files that will then deploy to dev, test, and prod, because you can just pass in a different code for that environment. So that's really useful and really powerful, because
Yeah.
it reduces those overheads and you don't have to maintain as many files. And again, just way easier to understand. So I think they're the main things that you'd really want to do for your infrastructure as code, to make sure that you can deploy to those multiple environments. The next thing would be how you actually deploy that code, and how you store that code and use it. So the tool that we use is Azure DevOps. It's closely integrated with Azure, so it makes sense if you're on the Microsoft platform. But also it's got integrations for Google Cloud, AWS, whether you're deploying apps on-prem even. It's got a lot of different integrations, so it's a really powerful tool. But what it has within that is deployment pipelines. So you can deploy your Bicep code or whatever code you need to using those pipelines. And then you can use approvals for environments within those pipelines. So you have an environment option within Azure DevOps. You can set up whatever environments you need. So whether that corresponds to your sort of dev, test, prod architecture, or whether you've got sort of smaller environments within those sort of sections. If you need to deploy small bits of code to very specific environments, you can do that as well. But when you set up those environments, it's basically just like a logical area that you can define approvals, or you can define sort of time windows and things like that to restrict your deployments and put controls in place, to make sure that you can't just click a button and it will deploy your infrastructure. It it puts things in place so that it either has to be approved by certain staff members, or it can only deploy during business hours, so 9 to 5. Or we can look for specific alerts in the platform even, and then try to deploy a pipeline to resolve an alert and things like that. So using those environments, it gives you a lot more control over when your pipelines run, how they run, and what restrictions are in place. So that's also a really important step when you're deploying to those multiple environments, making sure that if you push something out to dev, it's not necessarily going to go and automatically then deploy to test and production as well. You have to manually go in and approve that, and it gives you some time to make sure that your dev deployment's gone okay and that you're happy to move on to that next stage. So I think it's really important using the infrastructure as code and then using your deployment tools as well in conjunction with each other to make sure that you've got everything in place at every stage you can, to segregate those environments and also make it as reusable as possible. So that's what I've been working on with our customer at the minute, and putting some of those approvals in place, putting the environments in place and getting those set up and things like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it really.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know that with a lot of these things, obviously with us, we've developed our own code, but I know it can seem quite like a kind of daunting task for some folks if they're coming to this for the first time. But there are things that obviously can help with this, right? There are things like your Azure verified modules these days, which have both Bicep and Terraform versions of, say, code for virtual machines or for networks or for VPNs or for anything. So, if you're out there and you haven't started this kind of stuff, there are those templates and sort of predefined modules out there for you to already use, and some especially also following kind of best practices as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think again they follow that modular structure. They're very easy to use, and they're very easy to author your own code alongside them to make those modules work best for you, and to make sure they're doing exactly what you need. So yeah, I think that's definitely the way to go. So Connor, I think you were going to talk to us a little bit about Entra ID and sort of guest accounts and how we can secure those and some of the settings around that.
Yeah, so I think when a lot of people begin to think about security with an Entra, they think about MFA, conditional access, passwords, and kind of guest access and securing your guest accounts sort of falls by the wayside. Especially because a number of the defaults that Microsoft have on allow guests to have sort of a probably unexpected amount of access into your environment. So with one of these, the kind of main guest user access, the default these days is to give them a sort of limited access to your environment. However, if your tenant was created a while ago, like probably most of ours were, the default was actually to give guest users the same level of access as regular members in your environment do. So if you jump into your user settings of an Entra, you can make that adjustment to limit their access or just sort of fully restrict it to essentially give them no visibility over anyone but themselves. So definitely something to consider. Another one while you're in there is kind of one below that, which is an administration setting, not tied directly to guest users, but kind of all your users in your tenant, and this may come as a surprise to some folks, can actually go to the Entra Admin Center these days, and see, basically read all of your groups, your users, who's in your groups, and basically have read access across all of your tenant. So it's a little bit odd there, and definitely something you could look to turn off. So regular users can't just hop in the admin center whenever they like and view your tenant. So definitely something to consider turning off as well.
I think that one there is a really weird default setting from Microsoft, because even if those users can't make changes to the settings, there's a lot of confidential information within Entra that you probably don't want those guests or just those usual users seeing. So I think it's a really important one to call out, and something that's sort of shocked me a little bit when you mentioned it today as well.
Yeah, it's very surprising, and I think a lot of people do tend to ask us, well, why are these the defaults? Surely these are secure if Microsoft are setting these defaults. And the truth is, Microsoft are setting these defaults because they want, out of the box ease of use for people coming in. I want people coming in, using the platform, buying licenses, and will worry about securing it later. That's sort of been, when these defaults have been brought to Microsoft, that's their answer. Hey, you can secure it later, and you can. But the issue with Entra is it's so big and sprawling that you need to know that you can secure these later. So that's kind of why I kind of wanted to discuss some of these points. Looking at some of the other points around securing external users coming into your environment is who can invite users. So by default, anyone can invite guests to your tenant. Even guests can invite other guests, which you can see if you've got a malicious guest in your environment, how that could spiral very much out of control. So you're going to want to look at perhaps pulling that back as well and allowing only members or admins in your environment to allow guest users in. Just cut down on potential incidents there. And another one as well is if you're only working with a few small other companies or a few other clients that you know of, you can actually limit the domains that are allowed to be invited altogether. So you can create a moderated list of domains that you want to allow invites to be sent to, and allow guests into your environment. So again, something to consider if you're only interacting with a small number of other domains, or if even you want to ban certain list of domains, you can do that as well. So definitely something to consider when you're looking at these accounts. Something else as well when it comes to guest accounts is conditional access. Obviously, conditional access is very wide-reaching in what you want to control in your environment. But looking at setting up some conditional access policies around guest accounts and maybe only allowing guest accounts in your environment to access certain apps that you want them to, as obviously by default, once a guest is in, they can kind of access whatever they wish. And so having some conditional access policies in place to say limit them from using Outlook, Teams, or only certain apps in your environment can really help lock down and secure and control what guests have access to. So definitely, again, something to consider when we're talking about guest access.
Okay, so we spoke a little bit about infrastructure as code, using modular deployments, using Azure DevOps to deploy that code to multiple environments. And we've also had a little look at guest accounts within Entra, some of the security measures we can put in place for that, and some of the sort of surprising defaults that Microsoft put in there, and those settings that you really need to look out for and make sure you're getting under control. So if you found any of that information useful, give us a like on the video. Let us know in the comments down below if there's any questions you want us to answer next week or anything that you need help with within your environment. We're here to help you guys at the end of the day, and we want to make sure you're getting the most out of all of this. So any other comments from yourself, Connor?
No, I think you've covered it all there. Yeah, please like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll be here next week with another Frequent Last Friday.
Brilliant. We'll see you next week, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.